so much, all of you that helped. And this evening's speaker is Cathy Antunes. And I think for many of you, she needs no introduction, but just as a refresher, Cathy is a public interest advocate, a writer, a speaker, and has broad business experience. She's been in executive sales. She's founder, leader, board member of numerous civic and volunteer organizations, which include Sarasota Citizens for Responsible Government, Sarasota County Council of Neighborhood Associations, and the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism and Development. She also blogs on local politics and has written a monthly column for SRQ Daily. And her topic tonight is really going to be a carryover from a meeting we had a while back on the largest discussion of dark money in politics about the Koch brothers. And now we're going to look at it from a really down-home and local issue. So, Cathy.
Thank you. Tidy up a little bit. Thank you so much. I'd say it's great to be in a room with people who take an interest, and these days it's very important. My particular passion is local politics. I think when the voter goes in the voting booth, most of the time, they know what they're going to do at a national level. They know what they're going to do at a state level. But at the local level, oftentimes, they don't even know who those people are. And the fallacy of that is, as I hope to show you, these people that we elect locally have a huge impact on our lives. And they go on, often, to higher office. So the great fallacy to me is, if you think you're going to clean up DC, and you allow the kind of corruption that happens in your own backyard, it's really not reasonable to expect that we're going to do better at a state or federal level if people are just not paying attention and not concerned about what's happening locally. So that's kind of my passion, how I got into this. So before I get into the slides, and I gave you a handout, which these slides are updated, but the handout will help you track things. And the dark money web, as you'll see, gets more complicated as you go on. But before I get into that, I want to talk about the business dynamic. Who are the local special interests? Without getting into too much detail, because honestly, that's a whole nother talk. But what are these folks getting? You know, who are they? So there's two groups. The first, and the next slide, we'll talk about the developer. If I can pull this out. Yay, I can, okay. So the developer business model in Florida, really most undeveloped communities, but what I know about Sarasota and Manatee is we really got a handful of big developers who, in my opinion, have bought our county commissions. Okay? What is their business model? They buy cheap land, agricultural, but also contaminated land. And those in Sarasota who are familiar with Foxfire West is land that was really built on, it's a landfill. And it wasn't until Carlos Baruch bought it and then went to the county commission to lobby for a rezone that the commission agreed to rezone it. The rezone had been denied for residential development the year before because it was contaminated. But when it was Baruch knocking at their door, they changed their mind. This was just a few years ago. So it can be agricultural land or contaminated land. They bankroll campaigns, local campaigns, and then they get the land rezoned for building, which confers value. One of the things about local government, and if you care about the environment, local government is really the fulcrum of land use decisions and environmental decisions. So if you're not paying attention to what's going on locally, and that is where the rubber meets the road, that hits us where we live. The other piece of their particular business model is getting infrastructure costs paid. Because the way it's supposed to work, the developer pays for their infrastructure. There can still be a problem even if they pay, because the way we build these days is actually not generating enough tax revenue to pay for our infrastructure on a long-term basis. Again, that's a whole nother talk. But with getting infrastructure costs paid or getting these agricultural land approvals rezoned, what we have is leapfrog development. One of the examples I use is Fruitville, you know, the shopping center at Honore with Publix and Starbucks, and then right next to it, there's a cow pasture. Do y'all know what I'm talking about? Okay. And then next to that, you've got what used to be Don Pablo's. You've got another shopping center. By buying commissions and getting these agricultural lands rezoned, we have a lot of what one famous planner calls checkerboard look, but it's called leapfrog development. And as a result, our existing infrastructure is underutilized, right? We're not using it to its full capacity. We build excess infrastructure before we've used what we have, and the long-term maintenance costs balloon. There was a study done by Joe Minicozy. He's part of Urban3 out of Asheville, North Carolina. The first study he did, published in 2010, used a new metric, tax yield per acre, to determine the actual value of development. And so tax yield is connected to the market value, right? We're taxed based on the market value of our properties. What he found was that in Sarasota County, it takes 80 years for a single family subdivision home to generate enough tax revenue to pay for its infrastructure. That is longer than the life of the infrastructure. This is a national problem. We are upside down when it comes to our municipal budgets. Now, what happens with new building is you get a big rush of money in the beginning. There's a guy named Charles Marone. His blog is called Strong Towns. I encourage you to check it out. He and Joe Minicozy are kind of preaching this message around the nation. But the bottom line is, it's a Ponzi scheme, and in the end, when you don't have any more undeveloped land left to get your high, and then you're just left with the long-term bills. And so this is not a sustainable business model, but it's being held in place politically, partly due to dark money, primarily due to the, I'd say, underinformed voters. That's the antidote to all of this. But also dark money. So the next slide. Okay, so the next particular special interest, these are the two major ones I'm concerned with, the corporate charter school business model. I am distinguishing, yeah, I can see Shirley. Corporate charter schools, Imagine schools, there are charter schools cropping up around the country that are for profit, and they're big corporations. I'm not talking about Sarasota Military Academy or the School of Arts and Sciences in Sarasota. When it's a homegrown, locally started charter school by parents, teachers, community leaders, that's a different animal. There's accountability, there's a feeling of pride in the community. With Imagine Schools, which is the example I'll use tonight, the CEO sent out a memo a few years ago recommending, well, basically he said, you know, our school boards, it's like we kind of like having them, but they're not really running things, okay? That was the tone of this memo. And what he recommended to his superintendents was to get unsigned letters, or undated, signed, but undated letters of resignation from all the school board members so that, you know, when they acted up, they could kick them out.
This was the board members of the charter school.
Yes, I'm sorry. Imagine charter schools. No, Imagine charter schools. So what do these charter schools do? For example, Imagine Schools will set up a school corporation, but then they'll set up a separate real estate corporation, still theirs. This real estate corporation becomes the landlord, and the school pays the real estate corporation their rent to use the building. Now Imagine charges up to 40% of their school budget to pay the lease. The average charge is 14%. So this is a way to siphon public money into a corporate enterprise. Not good for the kids, obviously. What happens then with those leases is they've been bundled into real estate investment trusts and then sold on Wall Street. So this is another way for Wall Street to get a guaranteed rate of return using public budget, right, for their investors. Again, not what we want. I also have found out through interviewing a school board member in Sarasota County that Imagine School, they get 2 payments, and surely you can correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but one is in the fall from the school board. They get money, right? The public school board. So they'll get a payment in the fall.
We're just a flow through. We don't decide what they get. The state
Right.
tells us what we get, and
Right.
we have to give it to them.
Yeah,
We
you
don't
have.
decide.
Okay. So they get a payment in the fall, and then they get a second payment in February, and it's based on their population of students. It's a certain amount per student. And then once they get that second payment, they have dumped the struggling students, said, okay, it's time for you to go. The belief is that these kids may underperform on the FCAT, right? And so you can imagine how disruptive it is in a child's life. This is a high school student in 10th grade who has to change schools, all new friends. Why? Because this is a corrupt business model that's set up for profiting. It is not set up for the benefit of our kids' education. If it were, they wouldn't be dumping kids. Public schools don't have that option. It reminds me of hospitals that are in the inner city. Their stats may look bad, but they're treating all the bad cases, right? Public schools take all comers. Charter schools that dump struggling students are padding their results to keep the money flowing to pay for their leases and all of that. So these are the 2 business models that I believe we should be concerned about, and we're seeing special interest money coming into our local elections to support these business models.
Kathy, the business model item that you haven't put on in it.
Well, you know what, Shirley? I don't want, no.
Impact fees.
Wait a minute. I'm gonna keep going. I can't talk about it all.
All right.
Okay? Yeah, so next slide. All right, so this is a simple PAC flow chart. In 2013, Manatee for Common Sense was a PAC, and you all may remember, there was an effort to get a half penny to fund indigent health care in Manatee County. And it was supported by the hospitals. It was very transparent who wanted this. Not surprisingly, it was hospital corporations whose ERs were flooded, and they wanted to offload some of those patients. But the idea was, we're going to increase our sales tax by a half penny in Manatee County, and we're going to put that money toward indigent health care. Now, all of these PACs that I'm going to show you, the central ones, are managed by Eric Robinson, who I nicknamed the Prince of Dark Money. He controls, last year the Herald Tribune did an article saying $6 million, but the money flow I've seen since then, it's more, okay? But he controls many PACs, multiple PACs, with millions and millions of dollars that have come into them. One of them, in 2013, was Manatee for Common Sense. His accounting firm gave $10,000 to this PAC, and another political committee gave $4,400. Now, one of the things I'd like you to pay attention to, because it kind of goes to how this system is set up and what we might do to change it, besides overturning you Citizens United, but locally, what can we do? I'd like you to notice the accounting fees that are paid, because, if you think about assets under management, usually there's some connection with the amount of money in a PAC or, in a portfolio and the fees that are charged. I don't see any rhyme or reason to the accounting fees. It seems quite capricious, and, quite honestly, it's legal, but this is just a concern. Is this the way things should be done? So Manatee for Common Sense paid Robinson Hanks Accounting over 1/3 of their total budget to do accounting. And then they put out mailers and advertising, which is local campaigns. Stuffing the mailbox is pretty much the prime way that and signs. But it's the prime way money is spent for candidates. So when it was all over and the sales tax was defeated, $2,341.96 went to Citizens Have Rights in Sarasota. And the acronym for that is CHRIS. Eric Robinson is married to Christine. So I thought, well, I think it might be a romantic thing to name a PAC, if you're a PAC manager, after your wife. But anyway, the name is Chris. Okay, next slide. This was another PAC, again, focused on defeating the indigent healthcare half-penny. Here you have Robinson Hanks Accounting giving $50,000 to a PAC that took in a total of $115,000. And you have this PAC, Committee to Protect Florida's Seniors, which sounds like a great thing. But these names all sound wonderful. Who could be against protecting seniors, right? Okay, $66,000. They put out 60 grand in advertising, or stuffing the mailbox, and roughly $55,000 was paid to Robinson Hanks Accounting, which again, 45% of the total take went for accounting fees, which is very strange. I don't know why that would be. Okay, let's look at the next slide, because here we're going to look at who is the Committee to Protect Florida Seniors. So if you look at the two PACs that actually had their name on the flyer, their name on the mailer, that went into the mailbox in Manatee County, and if you look at their funding, you don't see anybody local. You don't see who's behind it locally. But then when you go into Committee to Protect Florida Seniors, there's this Veterans for Conservative Principles, $66,000. And this was the first time that we saw this locally that I'm aware of. Donating 66 grand to Veterans for Conservative Principles was Greenpoint Investors, an LLC that is not registered in the state of Florida. The newspapers could not figure out who this company was. No record of it in the state of Florida. The address is 200 South Orange Avenue in Sarasota, Florida, which I gave it away. I was going to ask you all,
Yep.
who is at that address?
Fern Buchanan.
No, it's not Fern Buchanan.
He is on South Orange.
It's up there. It's the Williams Parker Law Firm.
Oh.
Does anybody know who's affiliated with the Williams Parker Law Firm? Well, that's my aunt's law firm too. But they do a lot of things. Dan Bailey and Charlie Bailey are two very prominent land use attorneys in Sarasota County. If you're familiar with the celery fields and what happened there, Charlie Bailey represented Restaurant Depot. They wanted to put kind of a incompatible project right next to the celery fields. Charlie Bailey is representing the people who want to shut down Beach Road. What my cousin Tina was working on, the land grab in Sarasota County on Beach Road in Siesta Key. So while we don't know who these investors are, we do know their friends, which reside at the Williams Parker Law Firm. Yeah. Then you also see Carlos Baruth, who gave 25 grand, Pat Neal, $2,000, Randy Benderson, $7,500, a guy named Roger Dowdell, and this is, in terms of local PACs, it's the first time I saw him. I haven't seen him since. Mosaic gave $27,500. The accounting fees, 20 grand out of 150, so, a little over 10%. And then once Committee to Protect Florida Seniors gave money to, as we saw before, Manatee Against Taxation, Legal Reform Now, Citizens Have Rights in Sarasota, Take Back Our Government. So there's a couple things. Why would these guys here care about defeating a half-penny sales tax for indigent health care? Anybody want to guess? I have a guess. Well, if you're going to be taxing for health care, there's a limit to the half pennies you're going to say yes to. So, We have one in Sarasota for capital projects that's infrastructure. They want your money for infrastructure. That's their interest. They want you to pay their infrastructure costs. That's just a fact. That's what they do. The other thing to notice here, Legal Reform Now, which is a Robinson PAC, when I did this particular look, was in the spring of 2016, and it was running a $127,000 deficit. There were two Robinson PACs that were running big deficits. This was the largest one. And my question is, how does a PAC run a deficit? I mean, do they have a line of credit? You know, do they go to a bank? My particular guess, because Shirley, you showed me a problem you saw in one of the handouts regarding violations, but when you're managing millions and millions and millions of dollars that's being swapped all the time around the states, gee, you might make a mistake. And the reality is, this money, to me, it just is evidence to me of a slush fund operation, okay? You're not keeping it separate, you know, you can't borrow, a PAC can't borrow or put out IOUs, I don't see. So that's a concern, and I'll get to that later. When you have a handful of people who are managing millions and millions of dollars across the state, there's not that many of them. These people are having a big influence on our government, and they claim to have none. They claim, like Eric Robinson has said, look, I'm just the accountant. I don't make decisions.
Isn't
Yes.
Eric Robinson on the school board?
Yes, and I will get to that.
Is that the
Yep.
same Robinson family that is in Bradenton, that there's a
To-
well-known Robinson family that's in Bradenton?
I don't think
And one
so.
of them is-
Shirley says no.
Okay, because one of them's gonna be running for State House.
Well, if it's Christine Robinson, maybe, but I don't know. So anyway,
He also lists himself as president of a lot of those, so it's like, who's
well,
telling
he's
you? Yeah.
the accountant, the treasurer, the registered agent, yeah, of many of these PACs. But he has colleagues that do the same, is my point. You know, there's a guy named David Ramba, who actually was headed up one of the veterans PACs that I've seen and talked about. The last little thing I want to show you is Take Back Our Government. This is run, they got a $34,000 donation, and Bob Wechter is the chair of this particular political committee. In 2014, Bob Wechter was caught on videotape at a Publix. Does anybody know, I know you know, can anybody hazard a guess as to what he was doing?
Buying
Pretending to be someone else.
money orders
Yeah.
To implicate
to get
Lourdes.
Lourdes.
Right.
Lourdes were never
So Bob
sold.
Wechter committed identity theft in full view of a video camera in Publix. He bought a debit card in the name of a Republican. He's a Republican. So he was stealing the identity of a fellow Republican, and he then turned around and made donations in her name to Democrats with the purpose of being able to say, oh, I would assume later on, but he never got to because he was caught, she's not a real Republican, okay? Because she wasn't a cabal, you know, she wasn't in this loop. She wasn't an anointed candidate. Well, yeah, but it's a big deterrent for good people who want to run. It's a huge deterrent to know that they're going to do things, you know, and they have. Okay, and he basically, this was not his first felony, and he pled guilty to a misdemeanor. There, I don't know, not too much consequence for him, in my opinion. Okay, so the next slide. This is the PAC that, in my opinion, changed school board races in Sarasota County. It's called Citizens Against Taxation. And Frank Kovach, who was on the school board in Sarasota, who is the one who decided not to run, and Eric Robinson then filed to run for his seat. So this 2016, Frank said, oh, I'm not going to run. But what he said, is that, you know, when I first started, maybe 10, 12 years ago, it cost $10,000 to run a school board campaign. Okay? Little guy could run. It wasn't tons and tons and tons of money. In 2014, Bridget Ziegler ran against Ken Marsh. Ken Marsh had worked in the school board for many years. He was very well known. He had a huge war chest. I mean, he probably got over 100 grand, you know, to spend. And Bridget was a newcomer. Her husband is Christian Ziegler, who's the Republican state committeeman. She didn't have the kind of money that he had, okay? But this was the PAC that supported Bridget. Now you'll see that Pat Neal is in there with $1,000, and there's a lot of others, PAC money. West Coast Law is actually a firm that represents Gary Compothecras, and that'll show up later. But the thing I want you to really take a look at is the second time, in 2014, there was a company called Phoenix Media, okay? No relation to, there's a local paper called the Phoenix, but Phoenix Media put $45,000 into this PAC, and the address for Phoenix Media was Eric Robinson's accounting firm. And this is also a committee that was run by Eric Robinson. So, who is Phoenix Media? Not registered in the state of Florida, and the newspaper's like, we can't find it. So I did some research on my own, and I found 4 or 5 Phoenix Medias in the United States. 3 appeared to be functioning companies, you know, different states. 1 had folded, but there was one that was incorporated in July of 2014, about 2 weeks before this donation was made, and then it folded in the fall, and it was based in Wyoming. It was on the corporations in Wyoming. Does anybody know how corporations are formed in Wyoming, or what's special about Wyoming?
They don't have to report.
Yeah, Wyoming and Delaware, you don't have to have an actual human being affiliated with a corporation. The corporation rules there are very lax. So at the address where there was a Phoenix Media in Wyoming, there were about 249 other corporations. So it's a very good place to set up a shell corporation. That 45 grand, in my opinion, without it, Bridget would not have been competitive. It made her, it helped a lot. She was down and wasn't able to, her own campaign didn't have that kind of message muscle. So you can see the amount of money that was spent. And, ooh, look, West Coast Law got a refund. Some of the local people get refunds, which is interesting.